I'm Letty, and you're tuned into Beneath the Sandalwood Tree, where the darkest truths come to light. We're talking about the case of Dini Sera Afrianti, a young woman whose life was brutally cut short, and the man who literally ran her over with his car, Ronald Tanner. Did you think justice would prevail simply because a crime was caught on video? Think again. The story of Ronald, the privileged son of a politician, and his initial acquittal, which was so quickly overturned after 3 judges were arrested for accepting bribes, is a chilling reminder of how much a wealthy man will pay to buy his way out of murder. But the question that keeps me up at night is, how many Dinis are there whose killers walk free because no one was brave enough to expose the price tag on their silence? You want to talk about the price of a life? Let's talk about the life that Ronald Tanner so casually crushed, Dini Sera Afrianti, a name that should echo far louder than his spoiled brat infamy. She wasn't just a victim, she was a woman, the 4th child of a woman named Tuti, who traded the cool, mountainous air of her home in Babakan, Sukabumi, for the chance at a different life, grinding daily to provide for a young child who will now only ever know his mother as a name on a police report. Every woman listening knows the desperation of that hustle, the quiet, bone-deep sacrifice you make when you have a baby depending on you. And that's the reality Ronald destroyed. He didn't just end a life that night, he orphaned a child, and then had the audacity to try and seal that betrayal with a handshake and a sack of cash to 3 supposedly impartial judges. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was an assassination of a mother's hope. And the only thing colder than the asphalt Dini died on is the realization that, to the entitled elite, a bribe is just another necessary business expense, a small fee to keep their hands clean of the blood they've already spilled. Don't you dare think this was some cheap thrill seeker in a city, because the truth is so much heavier. The guilt Dini carried in her chest was 1,000 times heavier than Ronald's car. She was only 17 when she made the soul-crushing decision in 2011 to leave her 4-month-old behind, handing her infant to her mother back in that quiet tropical village, all because the hustle in Surabaya promised enough cash to keep a roof over her child's head. It's the universal heartache every ambitious woman understands, a gut-wrenching choice between holding your baby close and ensuring their future. Imagine that, tiny 4-month-old, the weight of a young life you walked away from, knowing every single extra hour you worked was a down payment on a dream for him. That was Dini's fuel, her weakness, and the driving force behind every dark bar, every late night, every dangerous connection she made to earn the money that Ronald Tanner decided was worth less than the annoyance of a woman who stood in his way. A man who didn't just kill Dini, but stole the future a working mother bled for. Dini wasn't built for the quiet life. She was a firecracker wrapped in fiery ambition, jumping from a nightclub server gig, the kind of job where you learn fast to smile, to becoming a glossy, high-heeled sales promotion at a Surabaya mall, the ultimate display of "I made it on my own." But the true hustle wasn't in those retail hours. It was in the glow of her phone screen, where she built an empire of over 70,000 followers, a social media influencer whose every post whispered success and independence to a world she'd sworn she'd conquer for her child, proving that she was smart enough, desirable enough, and ruthless enough to carve out a better life. She traded the safety of that quiet village for the danger of bright lights, knowing the higher you climb, the harder they try to knock you down. And a boy like Ronald, born with a silver spoon lodged so deep in his entitled throat, only saw a woman whose ambition he could afford to extinguish, not a queen building her own damn kingdom. Every strong woman has been there. The moment where the polished facade of your life shatters and the betrayal hits like a cheap shot to the gut. For Dini, that moment wasn't private. It was immortalized on her TikTok. The final, desperate post from the account handle Baby Ending, where she called out Ronald and the other woman he was flaunting, not as a whiny girlfriend, but as a queen, publicly revoking her crown from a useless king. She put her disappointment out there for 70,000 people to see, laying bare the truth. She was a self-made woman who didn't need his family's corrupt money, but she demanded respect. The one currency his entitled hands were physically incapable of giving. And in a twisted, pathetic power play, Ronald Tanor proved he'd rather crush her body into the cold, hard ground than let her walk away and expose his weakness to the world. You know the type. A man who has never once had to earn a single thing in his 31 years, whose silver spoon was forged in the fire of his father's political power. Ronald Tanner was the spoiled, entitled prince of a dynasty built on privilege and connections. His father, Edward Tanner, an elected official, and his mother, Mayariska Wijaya, whose only job was making sure their immense wealth shielded their progeny from all consequences. This isn't just a rich boy getting angry. This is the pure, blinding rage of a man who knows his entire world is a safety net, who believed Dini's struggle, her independence, and her final public defiance on TikTok were nothing but an amusing, easily disposed of toy. Never for a second grasping that the only difference between him and a true villain is that the villain actually has the strength to stand on his own. Ronald was just a pathetic boy whose daddy's name and money were the only weapons he knew. And when Dini dared to expose his weakness, he had to silence her, not because he was dangerous, but because he was terrified of being irrelevant. You'd think a man who bounced between the country's most elite schools, Calais Santo Joseph, Santa Agnes, Petra, the pedigree of inherited power, and even flew to Melbourne for a stint at Holmes Institute, would at least have a spine. But Ronald Tanner's entire life was a curriculum in avoiding accountability. He played at independence, taking temporary jobs at a meat factory and a luxury resort in Australia. But those were just expensive gap year excursions his parents bankrolled. A spoiled rich kid trying on the role of working man before quickly discarding it to return to Surabaya's humid embrace. Dini, the self-made woman, was the real power broker, building an actual life from scratch, and that infuriated him because while he merely attended elite schools, Dini had to become elite, grinding her way to her 70K followers. His passport stamped with privilege, hers with sweat and ambition, which is why he couldn't stand the truth. Her strength made his entire entitled existence feel cheap. Ronald came crawling back to Surabaya in 2020, shedding his Australian working man facade to launch an online shop, a frivolous, low-stakes venture that screamed classic mama's boy and proved he couldn't stick with anything that required real grit. He was the human equivalent of a revolving door, constantly starting, immediately bored, and always falling back to the well of his parents' money. Which is a story every woman has lived through. The man who admires your hustle, but secretly resents the fact that you have one, because your dedication exposes his inability to see anything through. Ronald was an amateur playing in a professional league, trying to keep up with a woman who had fought tooth and nail for her success. And it was that gnawing insecurity, the one every man like him has, that finally snapped when Dini threatened to expose him, proving the only thing he was truly capable of finishing was the life of the woman who dared to tell him no. Of course, Dini didn't want the tequila. Every woman who's ever dated a possessive man knows the razor-thin line between a good night out and a brutal fight, and she had already publicly thrown down the gauntlet to Ronald on TikTok, so the last thing she needed was alcohol to loosen her tongue at Black Hole Karaoke in Landmark Mall. She was there for her friend Ivan Cianto, but Ronald showed up like a dark shadow, and suddenly Dini found herself boxed into room 7 with 6 people and a bottle of hard liquor she desperately tried to wave away, knowing that one sip, one moment of lowered guard could turn into a catastrophic mistake with the mama's boy who couldn't stand being second to her ambition. But a woman can only be so strong for so long. The insidious pressure, the soft mockery, the simple, weary desire to just relax. So she gave in, letting the tequila burn down her throat, believing she could control the night, unaware that the real danger wasn't in the liquid, but in the entitled monster waiting for her to finally slip. Every woman knows that the most dangerous part of a toxic relationship isn't the public drama, it's the silence of the walk to the car. And at 12:10 a.m., Dini made the fatal mistake of walking out of room 7 with Ronald, the bottle of leftover tequila clutched in his hand, a volatile trophy of their wasted night. She slapped him first, a desperate, gut-wrenching moment of reclaiming her power in the enclosed silence of the elevator, proving she was done being quiet, done accommodating his weak man rage. And that was the fuse to the bomb. He retaliated with the vicious, cold calculation of a true coward, a kick to her leg that shattered her balance, then the sickening final sound of the glass bottle crashing against her head. Dini, who fought her way up from nothing, whose entire life was a battle to keep her head high, was brought down by the son of a politician using the very bottle she had tried to avoid. An act that wasn't about love or anger, but about a spoiled boy extinguishing a light that shone too brightly on his own pitiful darkness. Dini was sitting there, her body broken and slumped, her legs outstretched on the cold, unforgiving basement floor, next to the very car Ronald was about to turn into her executioner. She wasn't hiding. She was done fighting, a defeated queen waiting for the inevitable. But even in that state of utter surrender, she still had one last defiance left. He slid into the driver's seat, the entitled coward, and offered her one final patronizing chance, asking if she was coming home, a disgusting pretense of a normal life he knew he'd already destroyed. But Dini didn't answer because she didn't need to. Her silence was the loudest rejection he'd ever received. That was the last straw for his fragile ego, and because a man like him can't bear to be ignored, the only power move left was to literally obliterate her. He slammed the gas, turning the expensive metal into a weapon, dragging her body for 3 sickening seconds as the vehicle, his father's ultimate symbol of impunity, ran right over the woman who had dared to choose her self-respect over his weak love. There's a special kind of chilling depravity reserved for a man who watches the life drain out of you and chooses convenience instead of salvation. Ronald admitted it later in the cold light of day. He felt the impact, the sickening thump of the car connecting with the woman he claimed to love. And when he stopped, he saw Dini lying there, still alive, a gasp of breath left in her ambitious lungs. But Dini's beating heart was an inconvenience, a messy, loud complication that required effort and exposure. So when another car attempted to exit the basement, Ronald didn't render aid. He just moved his damn car out of the way, leaving the woman who dared to challenge him bleeding on the concrete. And when the first responders, Fajar Farudin and Imam Subekti, rushed to the scene of the accident, the final, unforgivable betrayal wasn't the violence, but his casual denial. He looked at her broken body and told him, with the blank eyes of a true narcissist, that he didn't even know her, severing her from his life with a single brutal lie that sealed her fate and proved his political pedigree had only taught him one thing: how to dispose of the evidence. It wasn't over yet, because men like Ronald never handle their own messes. The final, sickening phase was the cover-up, the moment his entitlement turned Dini's body from a woman into a problem that needed to be neatly tucked away. When Stephen Josefa, a witness with a shred of decency, finally forced the truth out of him, Ronald didn't feel remorse. He felt cornered, which is why he stopped denying her existence only long enough to perform the most depraved act of his pathetic life. Instead of driving his shattered victim to a hospital, he shoved Dini's bleeding body into the trunk of his car, treating the woman he claimed to love like a bag of trash he needed to dispose of. Every woman knows the horror of realizing you mean nothing to a man, but to be discarded into a dark trunk like luggage, the metal slamming shut on your last moment of freedom, that is the ultimate act of violation, proving his only goal was to drive away from the consequence, leaving Dini's dream of a better life suffocating in the dark. He drove past every emergency room, every clinic, because for Ronald, the only thing worse than killing Dini was dealing with the paperwork and the public scrutiny of a crime scene. He needed a clean break, a way to make her disappear without his fingerprints on the final act. So, he took her to her own apartment complex, a place she'd worked so hard to afford. And that's where his act of calculated cruelty reached its climax. He dragged her lifeless, beaten body from the trunk, put her in a wheelchair at the lobby, and then performed his final twisted gesture of false concern. He simply abandoned her with a security guard, Mohammed Mustafa, not offering an explanation, not providing identification, just dumping his problem at the curb. Dini, the woman who had fought her way off the streets and onto the timeline of thousands of followers, was left in a chair, a cautionary tale of a self-made woman whose biggest mistake was believing a rich boy's promises, a broken trophy discarded in the sterile light of a high-rise lobby. The last place the self-made woman who dreamt of a bigger life should have ended up was being rushed into the hospital, but even that was too late. The ER doctor's final clinical confirmation was that Dini's heart was in asystole, a flat line, a cruel end to a life that had always beat with such frantic, relentless ambition. She was gone, not from some organic failure, but from the brutal indifference of a spoiled man, a truth later cemented by the medical examiner, who confirmed the death was due to unnatural causes. That's the real tragedy. Dini, who who fought off poverty, overcame a dead-end job, and clawed her way to social influence, couldn't fight off the one thing every ambitious woman fears most: the small, insecure man who, when rejected, uses his power and his privilege to make sure your story ends before your time, leaving only the grim, undeniable proof that some monsters are simply too well connected to face their own sins. There is no justice in a world where rich men play God. But Dini's death finally ripped the curtain back on the whole rotten system. Ronald, the pathetic mama's boy who thought his father's political shield was impenetrable, was finally dragged into court, arrested, and charged. A small victory for every woman who's ever been gaslit and hurt by a man who thinks rules don't apply to him. The public prosecutor demanded a 12-year sentence and a pittance of 263 million rupiah in restitution, a number so small it was an insult to the life and ambition Ronald had extinguished. Yet for the entitled son of a congressman, even the threat of 12 years behind bars was an unthinkable loss of his privileged reality. Dini had paid the ultimate price for her independence. Now, the world waited to see if the money and connections that built Ronald's gilded cage were strong enough to dismantle the entire justice system just to keep their golden boy out of jail. Every man has a weakness, and for Ronald, it was his mother's unconditional, corrupted love. He didn't have to face the music because when the public prosecutor demanded 12 years, he just had to turn on the weak, pathetic tears he hadn't shed since he was a child. And his mother, Mariska, answered the call with the only thing that mattered in their world: money. The Surabaya District Court, a supposed pillar of justice, became a rubber stamp for their privilege, as the presiding judge, Arantua Dominic, looked at the overwhelming evidence of a body crushed and a life stolen, and still pronounced the spoiled prince not proven guilty, setting him free with a verdict that wasn't about law, but about grease and power. Dini's final, heartbreaking fight for dignity was erased by a single, shocking ruling, confirming the devastating truth every woman learns: even in death, a rich man's son is worth more than a self-made woman's life. That's the thing about true power. It doesn't just protect you, it buys the silence of everyone around you. But even a system built on bribes can't withstand the light of public fury for long. Ronald's crocodile tears worked in the courtroom, but the stink of the acquittal was too strong. And when the inevitable special investigation was launched, the whole sordid foundation crumbled. It wasn't Ronald who was truly ruthless. It was his mother, Mariska Wijaya, who was exposed alongside his lawyer, Lisa Ramat, as the architects of the bribery scheme, trading cash for Dini's justice. The three judges, Haru Hanino, Erwintua Damanik, and Mangapul, had sold their verdicts for a price, confirming every single fear Dini must have had, that her life was cheap, her struggle was meaningless, and her murderer would always walk free simply because his family could afford to buy every player on the board. This is where the narrative shifts, where Dini, the ambitious, self-made woman they tried to erase, gets her ruthless revenge. Not with her own hands, but through the sheer weight of their collective corruption. The price for stealing her justice finally came due, and it was paid in prison sentences. Cold, hard numbers that tallied up the depth of the betrayal. The lawyer, Lisa Ragmott, bought 14 years, the longest sentence, fitting for the fixer. The head judge, Heru Hanindyo, got a decade, and his two pawns, Erintua and Mangapul, got 7 years each, proving that the three men who looked Dini's fate in the eye and lied now get to trade their velvet robes for concrete cells. But the ultimate satisfaction was seeing Ronald's mother, Myriska Wijaya, the powerful matriarch who thought she could buy anything, including her son's freedom, get 3 years for conspiracy, shattering her illusion of invincibility and forcing the woman who enabled the murder to finally lose the one thing she truly cared about, her own pampered freedom. Even with his mother and his lawyer buying off every judge they could find, the narrative Dini built, the one of a self-made woman crushed by fragile male ego, was too loud to ignore, and her family, the true definition of relentless, took the fight all the way to the top. The Supreme Court became her last chance at justice, the final, unforgiving arbiter. And in a move that shook the corrupt foundations of the country, they nullified the disgusting acquittal, proving that even political power has limits when the cameras are watching. The final, definitive price for Ronald Tanner was declared: 5 years in prison. It wasn't the 12 years the prosecutor demanded, and it wouldn't bring Dini back. But it was a sentence, a number that meant the entitled prince of a crooked dynasty would trade his expensive suits for a prison uniform, finally proving that no matter how much money you have, some women, even in death, are powerful enough to make you pay. He thought he could buy his way out, that the blood on his hands could be washed away by his mother's money and a bribe to a crooked judge. But now, Ronald is exactly where he belongs. Stripped of his privilege, his bespoke suits replaced by the anonymous gray of the state, serving his 5-year sentence in the stifling confines of Salemba Prison, Jakarta. Every woman who's ever had to fight a system rigged against her can find a sliver of cold comfort in that image. The spoiled mama's boy, the entitled prince, now just another number in a cell, far from the velvet ropes of Surabaya clubs. Dini, the ambitious sales promoter and influencer, is gone, but her victory is definitive. Her murder, her very body, became the wrecking ball that shattered his family's illusion of impunity. And now he has 5 long years to think about the woman whose refusal to be silenced cost him the one thing he valued most: his freedom. So here is the harsh, ugly truth that Dini's death screams from the walls of that Jakarta prison. The only thing more dangerous than a reckless man is a coward with connections. Her murder wasn't just a tragedy. It was a devastating warning to every woman who's ever been told her ambition is too much or who dared to walk away from a man who expected her submission. Ronald's 5 years is merely the collateral damage for his family's exposed corruption. But the true moral of Dini's story is that for women, the highest price of success is often paid when you demand respect from a man who was born entitled to disregard it. Remember her name, remember her hustle, because what happened to Dini Sera Afrianti is proof that domestic violence doesn't just happen in the dark. Sometimes it rolls right over you in the basement of a luxury mall, shielded by money and political power until the public eye forces the system to crack. This is why we talk about it, why we refuse to let a 31-year-old mama's boy be the end of her narrative. If Dini taught us anything, it's that you have to keep fighting, even when you're tired, even when the world is rigged against you. Don't let her story fade into the darkness of a prison sentence. Hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe to keep this story alive, because the true punishment for men like Ronald is the ongoing visibility of their crime. Tell me, in the comments below, what is the most heartbreaking lesson you take away from Dini's story?